Welcome to the Crawcast. I am your host, George Krawczak, and these are my reactions to Week 1 of the NFL football season. So the first game was the Chiefs and Ravens, where the Chiefs won 27-20. This game was actually really good, and both teams looked really good. Patrick Mahomes was the leading Chiefs passer with 291 yards, one touchdown, one interception. Isaiah Pacheco is the leading rusher with 45 rushing yards and a touchdown. Rashid Rice was the leading receiver for the Chiefs with 7 receptions and 103 yards. And Harrison Butker was 2 for 2 and on field goals and 3 for 3 on extra points. So the Chiefs were really good on offense, and Xavier Worthy was pretty impressive. The one thing that I would kind of negate a little bit is, so one of his catches was I believe for a 35-yard touchdown, and it was just a busted coverage. He was left wide open, and so it feels like more or less anyone can do that. And then the running touchdown was, again, it was a 21-yard rushing touchdown. If you freeze frame it, there's a frame where it's like the entire offensive line is ahead of him, and it looks like another one of those where anybody could do it. I don't want to knock him too bad, because I do think he will be a good player, but just those two I feel like are a little bit misleading. On defense, Chris Jones looked really good, constantly getting pressure on uh, Lamar Jackson, and overall, really good game for the Chiefs. And same with the Ravens. Lamar Jackson was 26 for 41, 273 yards and a touchdown. Derrick Henry had 13 rushes for 46 yards and a touchdown. Lamar Jackson had 16 rushes for 122 yards. So the Derrick Henry one is fascinating to me. I did say this beforehand. I didn't think Derrick Henry would have that great of a year, just because he's older and a bit slower. And Justice Hill took all the receiving snaps. I know Derrick Henry's not that much of a receiver, but I thought it would have been a little bit more leaning towards Derrick Henry, where it's like you don't know whether they're running or throwing, but they're clearly like, okay, if Derrick Henry's in, we're running. If Justice Hill is in, we're throwing. So Isaiah Likely was the leading receiver with 9 receptions, 111 yards, and a touchdown. And that's another shocking one is I knew he was going to effectively split time with Mark Andrews, but I have to look at the snap count again. But I believe he might have even played more than Mark Andrews. And I don't know if Mark Andrews is still like rehabbing his injury and not fully 100% yet. But Isaiah Likely looks like he's going to be one of the top receivers for a while on this team. And then Justin Tucker was 2 for 3 on field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points. He missed another 50-plus yard field goal, and this is becoming a problem. I think he's like 2 for 8 on his last 8 50-plus yard field goals. He is certainly losing it and getting a bit slower. Hopefully that won't cost him a game. Overall, this is a really good game. Both teams are great. And I'll move on to the next one. The next game is the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Green Bay Packers. The Eagles won 34-29. And I'm just going to be honest, this game, neither team looked very good, but I'm not really going to hold it against them. I'm going to kind of pretend this game really didn't happen for either team, just because the field conditions were so terrible. Like every single play, there was about 3 guys slipping. So it led to a lot of busted coverages and sometimes dropped passes or wide receivers slipping during their routes, and then occasionally some bad runs because, again, people are just slipping during their run. And so I don't even want to count this game just because the field conditions were so bad and so out there. As well as there was a lot of extraneous circumstances. Like, for example, the Eagles, I think they had close to a 10-hour flight, and the Packers had close to a 12-hour flight there instead of your normal 1.5 to 2 hour flight for the game. So that's like a whole day of preparation and practice wasted there. And then the Packers, I think they had like a 2.5 hour drive from their hotel to the stadium. Again, that's wasted practice and preparation there. And so there's just so many extraneous circumstances where it feels like this game really shouldn't count as any positives or negatives for either team. For the Eagles, Jalen Hurts was 20 for 34, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Saquon Barkley had 24 rushes, 109 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. Saquon Barkley did look really good. The Eagles' leading receiver is A.J. Brown for 5 receptions, 119 yards, and 1 touchdown. And then on defense, Zach Bond played really, really fantastic. He had 2 sacks, 11 tackles, and it was just all over the field and was really good. And then Jake Elliott, he went 2 for 2 on field goals. and 4 for 4 on extra points. For the Packers, Jordan Love went 17 for 34, 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. He had a couple of really good throws, but overall just wasn't very good. And also, like I said about the field, if you look at a lot of his throws, there was a lot of slipping and he was off balance a lot. So even then, I hate holding it against him too much. The Packers' leading rusher was Josh Jacobs with 16 rushes for 84 yards. He really didn't have that great of a game. In the second half, he really started to turn it on, but overall, as the whole game, he didn't really do that great. The Packers' leading receiver was Jaden Reed with 4 receptions, 138 yards, and 1 touchdown. He did have a really good game with quite a few long passes, and he is the league's leading receiver currently. On defense, Jair Alexander had that one. Like, I don't even want to say it was a great play by him. It was just a horrible play by Jalen Hurts on that on the interception with Jair Alexander. The one by Xavier McKinney was really, really good. That was a fantastic interception by Xavier McKinney. And then their kicker, Brandon Averson, went 3 for 4 on field goals and 2 for 2 for extra points. And it's quite ironic that the two major issues coming out of the Green Bay Packers training camp were the kicker and the backup quarterback. And Jordan Love got injured. There's 0% chance he's playing week 2. I think he probably will play week 3 if you want me to bet money on it. I think he will. But there's 0% chance he plays week 2. And like I said, it's quite ironic. So the kicker missed a field goal when they have major kicker issues. And now that their backup quarterback is going to play at least one game. And they're having major backup quarterback issues. The next game is the New Orleans Saints versus the Carolina Panthers. The Saints won 47-10, and this game really shocked me just how terrible the Panthers were. Like, I didn't think the Panthers would be great, but I didn't realize that they would be this terrible. Nothing good came from the Panthers. I wouldn't even say there was a good player, a good play, just nothing. It was all terrible. The Saints are actually pretty impressive, but I don't even know how good that was from the Saints being good versus the Panthers being so unbelievably terrible. The Saints' leading passer was Derek Carr, who went 19 for 23 for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Alvin Kamara with 15 rushes, 83 yards, and 1 touchdown. Their leading receiver was Rashid Shaheed with 3 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown. And overall, their defense was just all over Bryce Young. Their kicker went 4 for 4 on field goals and 5 for 5 on extra points. And just overall, just completely destroyed this Panthers team. They could not do anything. The Panthers' leading passer was Bryce Young, who went 13 for 30, 161 yards, 2 interceptions, 0 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Miles Sanders with 5 carries for 22 yards. Their leading receiver was Adam Thielen with 3 receptions for 49 yards. And just overall had a very, very rough day. Their kicker, Eddie Pinheiro, went 1 for 1 for field goals and 1 for 1 on extra points. Yeah, just terrible, terrible day for the Panthers. And honestly, the Panthers are probably going to be the worst team in the NFL. I thought it was going to be the Patriots, but no, it's going to be the Panthers, it seems like. The next game is the Minnesota Vikings versus the New York Giants. The Vikings won 28-6. And Sam Darnold did really good. This is something I actually predicted because I thought the offense is good enough around Sam Darnold where he didn't necessarily need to play great, he just didn't need to blow it. And I thought the offense is good enough where Sam Darnold can just play well enough to win. He was a 3rd overall pick for a reason. I get it. His NFL career really hasn't turned out, but he went 19 for 24, 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Aaron Jones, 14 rushes for 94 yards and 1 touchdown. Their leading receiver is Justin Jefferson with 4 receptions, 59 yards, and a touchdown. And then just the Giants' offense was just so horrible. Their kicker went 4 for 4 on extra points. Daniel Jones, he went 22 for 42, 186 yards, 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Devin Singletary with 10 carries for 37 yards. The leading receiver was Malik Neighbors with 5 catches for 66 yards. And their Graham Gano went 2 for 2 on field goals. Yeah, the Giants, just like the Panthers, they're going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL. Their offensive line just didn't look good. Daniel Jones looked horrible. There's just no positives to really say about it. Whereas the Vikings, kind of the reverse in the sense that, I do think they can be a fringe playoff team if Sam Darnold, like I said, just plays well enough to not blow it. The next game is the New England Patriots versus the Cincinnati Bengals. The Patriots won 16-10. And I just want to say this one actually did surprise me. Not necessarily that the Patriots really didn't do that great, it's just that the Bengals were so terrible. And honestly, I'm thinking we're getting to the point where maybe Joe Burrow just isn't elite anymore. Because I get it, last year he was injured, so maybe you give him a little bit of a free pass. But I cannot remember the last time Joe Burrow had an actual decent game. And he has just been horrible for a while now. He had that one great Super Bowl run, and since then he's just done nothing. So Jacoby Brissett did 15 of 24 for 121 yards. Their leading rusher was Ramondre Stevenson, who had 25 carries for 120 yards and a touchdown. And then their leading receiver was Austin Hooper, who had 2 catches for 31 yards. And their kicker, Justin Sly, went 3 for 3 on field goals and 1 for 1 extra points. Whereas Cincinnati, Joe Burrow went 21 for 29, 164 yards. Zach Moss, their leading rusher, with 9 rushes for 34 yards and a touchdown. And Jamar Chase went 6 for 6 for 62 yards. That's their leading receiver. Just not good, and honestly, the Bengals are the one team where I actually might be concerned about. Again, I think a lot of this is week 1 rust, where a lot of these guys, if they made the playoffs, haven't played since February, and so it's been a long time. Whereas there's some teams that you say, okay, it's probably just week 1 rust, don't have to be concerned about it. But the Bengals, I think you might actually have to worry a bit. The next game is the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Steelers won 18-10. The big talking point about this game is the Steelers' defense. It was absolutely phenomenal, especially TJ Watt, who might win Defensive Player of the Year. He is absolutely great. And also, I kind of like what I said of the Vikings. The defense is so good. All Justin Fields needs to do is essentially just not blow it. Okay, as long as he plays well enough to not cost some games, then they can make a playoff run. Last year they made the playoffs with Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph at quarterback, and right now Kenny Pickett is the backup to the Eagles and Mason Rudolph's the backup to the Titans. So as long as Justin Fields doesn't blow it, I think they can make a playoff run. So their leading passer is Justin Fields, who went 17 for 23, 156 yards. Their leading rusher is Najee Harris, who rushed 20 times for 70 yards. I was a bit surprised that Jaylen Warren only had 2 rushes for 7 yards, but he is still nursing an injury. Their leading receiver is George Pickens, who had 6 catches for 85 yards. And like I said, TJ Watt was just fantastic. Now for the Falcons. This was pretty shocking to me. I get Kirk Cousins still injured on a new team and still has to get acclimated to things, but he was just not very good. I thought he would have been way better than this. He went 16 for 26, 155 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Bijan Robinson was their leading rusher at 18 rushes for 68 yards. Their leading receiver was Ray McCloud, 4 receptions for 52 yards. And again, honestly, the shocking thing about this week is I feel like none of the quarterbacks really played that well. For example, only one quarter. Hold on, give me 1 second. Only 2 quarterbacks threw for over 300 yards, and that was Tua and Matthew Stafford. And then 8, 9, 10. Only 14 quarterbacks threw for over 200 yards. And that's less than half the league throwing for over 200 yards. This is just a horrible, horrible week for quarterback play. The next game is the Indianapolis Colts versus the Houston Texans. The Texans won 29-27. Overall, this was a really, really good game by Texans and C.J. Stroud. He went 24 for 32, 234 yards and 2 touchdowns. Joe Mixon went 30 for 159 and a touchdown. Their leading receiver was Nico Collins, who had 6 receptions, 117 yards. And their kicker, Kymie Fairburn, went 3 for 3 and on field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points. Anthony Richardson, I think his stats are a little bit misleading. He went 9 for 19, 212 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. But he had that one amazing throw, basically off his back foot, threw it like 60 yards into the end zone. And that was an amazing, amazing throw. But other than that, I think his stats are a little bit misleading and just not that great. Anthony Richardson was also their leading rusher, who had 6 rushes for 56 yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver is Antonio Pierce, who had 3 receptions, 125 yards, and a touchdown. And because, he only completed 9 passes, which obviously isn't a lot, but he did keep them in their game. And their kicker went 3 for 3 on extra points. Overall, these teams are both going to be really, really good, especially the Texans. They really impressed me a lot. And Anthony Richardson, he is new. I think there was a stat where it was like he only has played 17 games since high school, so he still is relatively new to this and does have a lot to improve on. But as a starting point, not too bad. The next game is the Buffalo Bills versus the Arizona Cardinals. The Bills won 34-28. And it really shocked me at the time of possession, especially at the beginning. I think in the first half, Josh Allen threw like only 2 passes. Overall, Josh Allen looked really good. He went 18 for 23, 232 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was James Cook, who had 19 rushes for 71 yards. Their leading receiver was Keon Coleman, who had 4 receptions for 51 yards. And their kicker went 2 for 2 on field goals and 4 for 4 on extra points. And overall, they looked pretty good on offense. And Josh Allen was really good rushing the ball as well. And overall, they just looked pretty good. And then for the Cardinals, Kyler Murray went 21 for 31, 162 yards and a touchdown. He was also their leading rusher with 5 rushes for 57 yards. And then Greg Dortch had 6 receptions for 47 yards as their leading receiver. Kyler Murray really needs to improve. He had a lot of like dink and dunk passes, and there was a couple of plays, especially if Marvin Harrison was wide open. And occasionally you're not going to see everybody, so I think that's a little bit, of an outlier / unfair because you're not looking at the entire field every single play, and you're going to occasionally miss players. But just overall, Kyler Murray just needs to play much, much better than this. And I think they got pretty lucky that they lasted this long, and the Bills just didn't do that well at the beginning, but really turned it around in the second half. This is probably the worst game of the weekend. Honestly, there was a lot of very, very terrible games. There wasn't really many good ones. And this one was just horrible. It was the Chicago Bears and the Tennessee Titans. The Bears won 24-17, and just honestly, everyone looked horrible. Caleb Williams looked horrible. Will Levis looked horrible. Like it really should have been a blowout when the Bears were up, or when the Titans were up 17-0. They essentially just blew it. Like Will Levis threw some terrible balls. If you look at Caleb Williams during this game, he had like 7 dropped interceptions and a lot of batted balls, and just wasn't very good. Granted, he is a rookie, and rookies usually don't play well, and so it's kind of like par for the course. You're not really expecting him to play that well, or at least you shouldn't be, because C.J. Stroud had an amazing rookie season, and he only threw 23 touchdowns, with 5 of those coming in one game. But just Caleb Williams did look horrible. He went 14 for 29 for 93 yards. DeAndre Swift was their leading rusher, who had 10 carries for 30 yards. DJ Moore was the leading receiver, had 5 catches for 36 yards. And just overall, the Bears' offense just could not do anything. They looked absolutely horrible, and Will Levis just kept giving them chance after chance after chance, and then eventually they just took it. And, they got, I believe, a fumble return for a touchdown, and then a punt return for a touchdown, and just overall did not look very good. And their kicker, Cairo Santos, went 3 for 3 on field goals and 1 for 1 on extra points. And then on the Titans side, Will Levis was their leading passer, who went 19 for 32, 127 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Tony Pollard was the leading rusher, who had 16 carries for 82 yards and a touchdown. Calvin Ridley was the leading receiver, had 3 catches for 50 yards. And their kicker Nick Folk went 1 for 1 on field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points. And just like I said, the Titans and Bears both have a lot to worry about. Neither of them are going to be good this year, And there's a lot of concerns for them just building in the future. And I don't think Caleb Williams will be good this year, but I do think he has the chance to be good next year. So we'll just see how these teams do. I, again, don't think either of them are going to be playoff teams or either of them are going to be very good teams going forward. The next game is the Miami Dolphins versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Dolphins beat the Jaguars 20-17. The Dolphins actually looked pretty decent. Like the first half of the game, they struggled a bit, and then they kind of turned it on in the second half. Tua went 23 for 37 for 338 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was, give me a second here, was Jeff Wilson, who had 5 carries for 26 yards, which is really shocking that, Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert really just got shut down the entire game. And then their leading receiver was Tyreek Hill, who had 7 receptions, 130 yards, and a touchdown. And just overall, it was kind of a sloppy game by the Dolphins, and they kind of got lucky that they're able to pull it back. Jason Sanders, their kicker, went 2 for 3 on field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points. And then for the Jaguars, again, they also kind of had a sloppy game, where Trevor Lawrence went 12 for 21, 162 yards and a touchdown. Tank Bigsby was their leading rusher, who had 12 carries for 73 yards. Their leading receiver was Gabe Davis, who had 3 catches for 62 yards. And Brian Thomas Jr. actually looked pretty good. He had a pretty impressive game. But just overall, it was not a good game for either team. The Dolphins' run game was completely shut down, but their passing game was pretty good. They did a excellent job at that. And we'll see if they can improve going forward. I am not concerned about the Dolphins' offense, a bit concerned about their defense, and the Jaguars, I'm very concerned about their offense and defense. The next game is the Seattle Seahawks versus the Denver Broncos. The Seahawks won 26-20. And again, not very good quarterback play on either side, really. Like, Geno Smith went 18 for 25, 171 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. I guess he had a decent game. And Kenneth Walker had 20 rushing attempts for 103 yards and 1 touchdown. Tyler Lockett was their leading receiver, had 6 catches for 77 yards. And their kicker went 2 for 2 on field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points. Bo Nix really struggled a lot. It felt like a lot of the opportunities were there for him, but he just couldn't complete them, couldn't make them. Their run game was completely shut down, and the Seahawks clearly had an idea what they wanted. They wanted to shut down the run and make Bo Nix throw on them, and Bo Nix simply just couldn't hang as of right now. He went 26 of 42, 138 yards and 2 interceptions. He was also the team's leading rusher with 5 rushes for 35 yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver was Josh Reynolds, who had 5 catches for 45 yards. And overall, just Bo Nix and their kicker Will Lux went 3 for 3 on field goals and 1 for 1 on extra points. Again, rookie quarterbacks usually just never do well. It's kind of as easy as that, and it's kind of like what you expect out of Bill Nix. I don't think you expect him to be an amazing quarterback right off the bat. The next game is the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Las Vegas Raiders. The Chargers won 22-10, and the big thing you learn about this is Jim Harbaugh loves to run the football. We saw him do it at the 49ers, we saw him do it at Michigan, and now we're seeing him do it with the Chargers. Justin Herbert will probably not have a very good statistical year because they are probably not going to rely on him a lot. Herbert went 17 for 26, 144 yards and a touchdown. Josh Dobbins was their leading rusher with 10 rushes for 135 yards and a touchdown. And Ladd McConkey was their leading receiver at 5 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown. And then Cameron Dicker went 3 for 3 on field goals and 1 for 1 on extra points. I actually thought Gardner Minshew played better than I was expecting. Like, I didn't think he was going to play great, more or less, regardless. But, again, he's a backup quarterback and has been a backup quarterback his whole career. And so he went 25 for 33, 257 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Zahir White, who had 13 rushes for 44 yards. That was their leading rusher. Their leading receiver was Jakobi Meyers, who had 3 receptions for 61 yards. Again, this offense is not that great, and I don't think Minshew really improves it that much, but I do think they're going to hang in there for quite a few games, and their defense is probably good enough to help carry them at least a little bit. Next game is the Dallas Cowboys versus the Cleveland Browns. The Cowboys won 33-17, and honestly, this is probably the most newsworthy game of the weekend in my opinion, because the Browns looked absolutely terrible. Deshaun Watson looked horrible. He just isn't good anymore. He can't do it. Ever since he got traded to the Browns, he's just been terrible. And it's one of those things where, honestly, I think he kind of is starting two new standards in the NFL. Number one, the fully guaranteed contract, because the Browns really cannot get rid of him until 2026 or 2027. Like, he's gonna be on the team for those 2 years, for the next 2 years, regardless of how he plays. And so you saw Lamar Jackson try to get a fully guaranteed contract. I think, if I remember correctly, Aaron Rodgers tried to get a fully guaranteed contract. There's been so many players who try to get this, and every single time the owners say no. And this is why, for Deshaun Watson, because there's no getting out of his contract, period. And also, I think it's going to set a new precedent of do not trade 3 first-round picks for your quarterback, because only 2 times in NFL history has 3 first-round picks been traded for a quarterback. The 49ers did it for Trey Lance, and I think they don't get made fun of enough for it, but that's just because since they drafted Brock Purdy, it felt like that really hasn't set the franchise back a lot, but the Dolphins used those picks to get Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and Bradley Chubb. So who would you rather have, Trey Lance or Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Bradley Chubb? And then the Browns traded 3 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson, and the Texans have now built an amazing team with C.J. Stroud because of those first-round picks. And so that's kind of the controversy there, is like, because I think their defense is good enough where Deshaun Watson just doesn't need, as long as he just doesn't blow it, they're going to be good. But Deshaun Watson can't play good enough to just not blow it. And with Dallas, there's kind of no news here. They played fine. Like, honestly, I think they played fine. It's just that the Browns played just so unbelievably terrible. So the Cowboys' leading passer is Dak Prescott, who went 19 for 32, 179 yards and 1 touchdown. Their leading rusher is Ezekiel Elliott, who had 10 rushes for 40 yards and a touchdown. That was a little bit of a shocker to me. I didn't think Ezekiel Elliott would get as much playing time as he did, and he looked fine. He looked fine. I thought he was going to look bad, but he looked fine. And then the leading receiver is CeeDee Lamb, who had 5 catches for 61 yards. And overall, their defense, like I said, it's hard to even say their defense looked great just because of how unbelievably bad the Browns' offense looked. And their kicker, Brandon Aubrey, went 4 for 4 in field goals and 3 for 3 on extra points. And then the Browns. Deshaun Watson went 24 for 45, 169 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Jerome Ford had 12 rushes for 44 yards and 1 touchdown. Their leading receiver was David Njoku, who had 4 receptions for 44 yards, and just overall looked horrible. Like, the Browns have serious concern right now. Like, I think they probably kind of have to stick it out with Watson because they cannot get out of his contract. It's kind of like one of those things where it's like if you pay too much for a crappy car and your car starts falling apart and you're like, I have to drive this car because I paid for it, even though I don't want to and I probably shouldn't. That's how Deshaun Watson is. Like, I don't want Deshaun Watson to be my starting quarterback, and he probably shouldn't be, but I paid so much for him that you cannot force him to be the backup and be paying top quarterback money for a backup quarterback. And like I said, that is the single worst contract probably in NFL history, where they are just paying him too much. And honestly, that was my opinion on the first place. I didn't think they should have. I thought they should have stuck with Baker Mayfield. At the time, I did think Deshaun Watson was a better quarterback, a clearly better quarterback than Baker Mayfield. But I just thought with the contract and the price they gave up to him was just way too much, and clearly that's been proven true. The next game is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Washington Commanders. The Buccaneers won 37-20, and overall, this was probably the best game of the weekend comparing the two teams because both teams looked really, really good. But Baker Mayfield probably looked like the best quarterback in the NFL, I'd say that. And then Jaden Daniels definitely looked like the best rookie quarterback in the NFL for this week. Baker Mayfield went 24 for 30 with 289 yards and 4 touchdowns. Their leading leading rusher was Bucky Irving, who had 9 rushes for 62 yards. Their leading receiver was Chris Godwin, who had 8 catches for 83 yards and a touchdown, and just overall looked really, really good. Their hold on, give me 1 second. Their running back Rashad White just did not look good though, and I think everyone knew this. Where his production last year was more out of overall carries versus actual good carries. And then for the Commanders, Jaden Daniels went 17 for 24, 184 yards. He was also their leading rusher with 16 rushes for 2 touchdowns. Something that also shocked me is I felt like Austin Ekeler did not play as much as he was projected to do, and Brian Robinson is the clear number 1. But Austin Ekeler was their leading receiver with 4 catches for 52 yards. There was a lot of kind of dinking and dunking for Jaden Daniels, and honestly, when I say he was definitely the best rookie quarterback, and I mean that more or less by default, because Bo Nix didn't look good, Caleb Williams did not look good, and Jaden Daniels at least looks like a viable starting quarterback as of right now. And so overall, Cade York was a problem, going 0 for 2 on field goals, but he did go for 2 for 2 on extra points. And I just think if you're the Buccaneers, you're very happy and very optimistic. And I think if you're the Commanders, you're very, very happy and very, very optimistic, because both teams played well, and you at least are showing potential with Jaden Daniels. The next game is the Detroit Lions versus the Los Angeles Rams. The Lions won 26-20, and this was a really good game in the second half. Jared Goff really struggled throughout the game, and Matthew Stafford struggled throughout the first half, and then just in the second half, and especially towards the end, he really locked in, and Stafford was almost perfect. Jared Goff was the leading passer for the Lions, who went 18 for 28, 217 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. David Montgomery was the leading rusher of 17 attempts, 91 yards, and 1 touchdown, and he had an amazing final drive in overtime, where I swear they just ran the exact same play every single time, running it up the middle. And it's just one of those where I was glad that they did, because if you're just running over someone and running through someone and they can't stop it, just keep going until you reach the end zone. I can't remember how many times they ended up. I think it was 4 or 5 times, but the only play that drive was literally just running up the middle with inside zone with David Montgomery. Their leading receiver was Jameson Williams, who had 5 receptions for 121 yards and a touchdown, and he just looked really good. It's good to see him finally break out. He was injured and suspended and just honestly did not look good throughout the day, or throughout his career so far, but he finally had a breakout game, which is good for him. Alex Anzalone was actually all over the field and looked really good too. And their kicker, Bates, he went 2 for 2 on field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points and looked pretty impressive. And then Matthew Stafford, he went 34 for 49, 317 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Kyren Williams, who had 18 carries for 50 yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver was Cooper Kupp, who had 14 receptions, 110 yards, and 1 touchdown. And this is what I've been saying all offseason, is that Cooper Kupp is going to reclaim the number 1 receiving spot. And that's what he looked like all night. And then now, of course, since Puka Nacua did get injured, Kupp is going to be the number 1 receiver in the Rams. And so overall, I think it was a really good game for both teams. The Rams' offensive line really got injured and banged up, but sometimes when Stafford just turns it on, he turns it on, and there's no stopping him. Even with a bad offensive line, he looked really impressive. The final game of the week was the San Francisco 49ers versus the New York Jets. The 49ers won 32-19. And let me just say, this game felt unfair. If you look at let me actually pull up the time difference. 1 second here. Okay, I can't find the time with the ball difference, but it was something like 40 to 20. It was something insane like that, where time of possession, because the 49ers just kept having long, sustained drives, running it through Jordan Mason, and he just looked phenomenal. The team looked phenomenal, And the receiving corps struggled a bit, especially Brandon Ayuk. He did not look good. He did miss time in training camp, obviously, because he was holding out for a new contract, but he did not look good. And just the defense, the Jets' defense is something to be concerned about. The one thing that you do have to look as positive for the Jets is Aaron Rodgers did look really good. Almost all of his passes were perfect. He did have the interception, but that was after a dropped pass. And if you look at a lot of the issues were just with drops. I think out of Aaron Rodgers' like 21 passes, I think maybe like 3 of them were off target and actually bad balls. So Brock Purdy went 19 for 29, 231 yards. Jordan Mason was the leading rusher, went 28 for 147 and 1 touchdown. And then Jawan Jennings was their leading receiver with 5 receptions for 64 yards. And then with the Jets, Aaron Rodgers was their leading passer with 13 for 21, 167 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Breece Hall did not play well. He really got shut down a lot and did not look good. He had 16 rushes for 54 yards and a touchdown. The Jets' leading receiver was Allen Lazard, who had 6 catches for 89 yards. And just overall, I think it's a decently positive game for both teams. If you're the Jets, you're probably very happy with the offense and very happy with how Rodgers looked. And then if you're the 49ers, the whole team just looked amazing. If the Jets, you do have to be concerned with the defense, though. So that is my reaction to Week 1 of the NFL season. Let me know your thoughts and comments in the comments below. Who do you think will be good or bad throughout this whole season? I'll make sure to have more content out later. And if you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money. I'll see you next time.